Representative Judd Matheny, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
You're introducing three bills, and you've already introduced three bills into the Tennessee legislature. Could you tell us a bit about those bills, what prompted them, and the progress?
Sure. The three we've passed, respectively, in the last 3 years, one apiece, were to deal with the creeping Sharia law that was coming into the United States and that I had learned about in other parts of the globe. We decided we were going to pass a law called Tennessee Laws for Tennessee Courts, which would specifically ban anything other than the English common law and the Tennessee-based law that we've passed and lived by over the years, with an express interest in heading off any attempt at Sharia law coming into Tennessee. We successfully passed that in the General Assembly, and since then 26 other states have emulated attempts or actually passed that piece of legislation. Tennessee's, I think, was written quite soundly, and we have not been challenged in court by it. Other states have, since they passed it upwards of 2 years ago. But that bill was very important as a beachhead to us, and it was my opportunity to learn more about Islam and Sharia. The following year, which was 2 years ago, we passed, which was probably the greatest lift to date, which was a material support bill. And it basically says that prosecutors in the state of Tennessee can take the United States designated terrorist list, and if we find someone or some entity in Tennessee that's providing material support to terrorist organization, technical support, safe houses, monies, electronic support, anything that would aid and abet any type of terrorist activity, that our local prosecutors could prosecute them for a Class A felony, which starts at a 25-year prison sentence. So that was a very strong law. It met with great opposition from the Muslim community in Tennessee. At one point we had upwards of 2,000 Muslims that came to protest that bill.
Why would anybody, Muslims included, be opposed to a bill which would prevent people from funding terrorism?
Primarily it was the Council on American and Islamic Relations and the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, that really stirred up the Muslims quite a bit and said this is nothing but an attempt by the legislature to attack the Muslim faith. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. This is an opportunity for Tennesseans to protect themselves where the federal government has chosen not to or cannot. And we were successful in passing that bill, and it brought international attention. Al Jazeera came and camped out in Tennessee for quite some time. I even had one gentleman that was fighting war in Iraq asked me why he was reading about me and Al Jazeera over there at the time. Yes, and it really was much ado about nothing from the side of the opposition. It is strictly a law to protect Tennesseans against those that would try to do something that was antithetical to our Constitution. And like I said, we were successful in passing that, and there are cases in Tennessee that now merit that charge, and some investigations are forthcoming. The third bill we passed, which was just this year, was about charter schools. Now, charter school, for those that don't know, is a quasi-public school, quasi-private also, where you can have an independent board of directors to manage your school. You still use government monies to operate your school, but you can raise private monies in addition to that, and you can be hyper-focused on a particular discipline if you choose to. It could be language arts, it could be math, science. And we encourage charter schools now in Tennessee because they are a competitive alternative to what is a failing public education system. However, after the first couple of years of charter schools being in place, we found that there were some entities that were attempting to abuse those, and primarily they were hiring foreign teachers. They were not disclosing funding sources, and they were not disclosing curriculums to the public eye. So we passed a law that went into effect last year. It requires all the curriculums, all the sources of funding to be made public on any website that the charter schools have, as well as for public inspection. And then we also limited the amount of foreign workers that could be hired at those schools at 3% of the entire staff.
And what was behind that limitation? What was the fear there?
Well, there's two things. One is it wasn't so much a fear as it was we believe that Tennessee and America have domestic teachers that are fully capable of teaching in our schools. And with unemployment high in the United States, and at the time it was about 10% in Tennessee, we wanted the first option for teaching to go to domestic teachers. Also, it's very difficult. We receive a lot of complaints from parents who it's difficult for some students to learn from a teacher with a foreign accent. And we just wanted to make sure that every opportunity was exhausted for a domestic teacher to be employed. Plus, we want to make sure that what is being taught in the schools is in line with accurate American history and accurate American civics, and that we are producing students that are going to be good American citizens and good and not be beholden to some other institution that is, once again, antithetical to our Constitution. And we found that perhaps there were some madrasas that were in our state, primarily funded from Turkey, that were trying to circumvent the normal process of educating our children and teaching what we thought was the correct curriculum in Tennessee. And our basic rule is, if you want to come here and live here, you live by our rules. It's a big world. You can live anywhere you want. But if you want to live here, you live by our rules. And that's just the way it's going to be.
What kind of support or opposition have you found from the average Tennessean out there? I know that you've gotten reelected with 2-to-1 majority, so there must be some support for what you're doing. But what about your detractors?
Well, there's a lot of support, and in my heart, I think it's in excess of 75%. The detractors are definitely, and you get used to it after a while, and it no longer bothers me. But you're called a bigot, you're called a racist.
A racist.
A racist.
Islam is a political movement. Some would call it a religion, spanning many races, all races.
Well, that's become.
Did they say what particular race they were that you were?
Well, it's become a catchphrase for opposition to almost anything that the conservatives are putting forward. It is a slur, and it's meant to discredit, and that's fine. I'm a good American, and I'm a good Tennessean. I'm proud of both of those things. I have a birthright that entitles me to certain things in Tennessee and certain things in America. Entitles my children to those same things and my fellow citizens to those same things. And if anybody else wants those, they must go through the proper channels to receive those.
There's been, since the election of President Obama for his second term, talk of cessation in a number of states. What's the feeling in Tennessee?
Well, you have people talking about it in Tennessee, and I think the White House website has now received the 25,000 signatures necessary for the president to respond to this. As has Texas and numerous other states. In fact, I think all 50 states have filed secession petitions with the federal government. Now, that's not going to happen. Nothing in me sees that happening. We're a very resilient country, but the bottom line is we're trying to show our displeasure, not only to our federally elected representatives and senators in Tennessee, but also to the conglomerate in Washington, that the direction that they are heading is not consistent with the way many southern states and some western states want to live. Once again, we believe there are 50 states, therefore it's okay to have 50 different ways to live. And people can choose where they want to live. One size does not fit all, and multiculturalism does not work. We know what works in Tennessee, and we know what works in America, and it is not reauthoring our history, and it is not circumventing our political process through sound bites and calling people bigots and racist. And we're going to continue to move forward. And we also have support in the General Assembly amongst politicians, which is obvious because we're passing these multiple bills. This has come through a long educational process. It's not like just one day we woke up and decided to pass these bills. We're watching what's going on in Europe. We're watching what's going on in other parts. We're watching history. We know history has a tendency to repeat itself. And we simply want to protect what is ours. We know it is a successful governing model, and we have been a guiding light to many areas in this world and want to continue to do that. And anything that would dilute that, we're going to fight it.
I know that you have a background in policing and with the armed forces.
Yes, sir.
And you've told me before that up until perhaps the current administration got into power, that you could go to your local law enforcement or the FBI and get a feeling for what was going on in your constituency. Has that changed?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Since the election of President Obama, there has basically been a gag order.
A gag order on what specific?
Federal law enforcement authorities speaking about Islam and Muslims and radicalization and jihad. All these words have been stricken from the law enforcement vocabulary. They've been stricken from they don't even teach it in the police academies. To me, that's very dangerous. We have a known threat, which is homegrown radicalization. We have an emerging number of mosques that continue to be out of the public eye, and we have traced firsthand radicalization, which eventually ended in bombings and murders of Americans to mosques in Tennessee. And we need to do something about it. And my constituents are demanding that I do something about it. Unfortunately, we've not received much help from the federal government. Hence, the entire reason we passed the Material Support Bill and the Tennessee Law for Tennessee Courts Bill, and limiting the number of migrant workers that are teaching in charter schools, and the reason we will pursue other legislation in the future is because Tennesseans want to be protected, and we just feel like the federal government, for whatever reason, they either will not or they cannot protect us.
Tennessee seems to be a hotbed for radical Islamization. Why do you think that is? I mean, we have Dearborn, Michigan, and of course that has its own problems, of course. But of all the states in the United States, Tennessee seems to be a focal point for radical Islamists. Why do you think that is?
Absolutely. You could look at various issues. I think it's the buckle of the Bible Belt, so to speak. It is a wonderful place to have a beachhead to many in of the Islamic faith. I think that they think building a mosque near a large university, having an active Muslim student association, and literally just forcing their way of life into our public schools, which has been well documented through public information requests and through interviews with various school systems in Tennessee. When we saw these things beginning, we knew we had to react. Therefore, as we reacted, the Islamists reacted even more. In law enforcement, we would call it a force continuum. We would apply a little bit of force, and then the opposite force and just a little bit more would be applied. And that's sort of where we are now, and it's almost a race to see who can mobilize the most followers the fastest and who can influence politics the most. And it has become quite an entanglement. We have had international figures from Hamas and CARE and other organizations come into Tennessee for grand openings of mosques and for meetings, and this is very much a hotbed. And we can trace, it's incredible what we see happening today in Gaza and the West Bank is in some cases being funded by organizations within Tennessee, and those organizations, in my opinion, at some point are going to be subject to the Material Support Bill when the federal government decides to act, and when we find the state prosecutors that can. And it's just it's something that none of us want to deal with, but we have to deal with it. It is here, and we will do it.
In Europe and in Great Britain, there has been an open immigration policy for people from Muslim countries, which has led over the last 25, 30, 40 years to the ghettoization of Muslim communities over there. There are no-go zones, Tower Hamlets in London, England, for example, and places in Antwerp and in Belgium that where non-Muslims simply take their life into their own hand by walking down the streets. Now, I understand that most of us here in the West will not actually understand the fear that's going on over in those nations because of an official multicultural policy and open immigration from Muslim countries. But you've been there, haven't you?
Yes, sir, I have been there.
Can you describe that to me? What happened? Who brought you there, and what did you learn?
Sure. A group called the Tennessee Freedom Coalition organized a trip with myself and several other legislators, Democrat and Republican, white and black. We took a very eclectic mix of political leaders, and there was no real agenda other than let's go meet and talk to people and see what has happened in Europe. And if I had gone to Afghanistan or Iraq or some type of warring country, I would have anticipated some fear, having to feel fear. Going to Europe, I thought, well, there's no way really I'm ever going to be in fear for my life, be in fear for my safety, have a truly life-changing experience other than get some education. But I was incorrect. I saw neighborhoods over there that I will not allow my country to turn into. I saw young children who were well-dressed and well-groomed spewing hate speech at me simply because I was white and in their neighborhood. Children the same age as my children. My children have never even heard some of the things, much less would repeat them that we were told. We were told that we had to leave, that it was no longer, it wasn't Brussels, it wasn't The Hague, it wasn't London any longer. These were North Africa. This is New Morocco. This is Sudan, New Sudan. It's just incredible the way history is being rewritten in Europe. It's being rewritten in our textbooks. They're losing their country, and I'm not going to allow that to happen here. And I talked to senior politicians, and when I say senior politicians, I mean on the par of what we would consider, what I would consider a United States senator in the United States, but high-ranking members of Parliament in these various countries, and they all went down to said the same thing, that a lax immigration policy, which began 20 and 25 years ago, has led to these issues, and now they are out of control, and they don't know where we're going to end up, other than it's not going to be good. We still have an opportunity in the United States to enforce the rule of law, immigration law, and once again, as I stated earlier in this interview, just to have the doctrine that you're welcome here, but you must live our way. That's the way it is. Go live somewhere else if you don't like it.
Now, of course, the United States has its protection of free speech and freedom of religion and freedom of conscience, but how will some of these laws that you're trying to put forward and have put forward conflict with the Constitution of the United States, where it says that, hey, we can preach what we like, we can pray how we like? Is there a conflict?
Well, if that was our thrust, there would be. But our thrust is not to say you can't pray, or you can't do this, or you can't say this. Our thrust is to say you just can't impose it on others, whether through threat, through lawsuit, through threat of physical violence, name calling. We separate the religion from the political. Islam has on purposefully has a very difficult time separating the two. Whereas I can talk to my young son or young daughter or any other fourth grader in the United States, and they understand there's a basic difference. Church is church. Our religion is our religion. We take care of it at home in our community, but we don't try to impose it on others by threats of physical force, violence, lawsuit, condemnation in the public, anything of that nature. So I just don't buy into that. Many of my colleagues don't buy into that, and we just want to say religious freedom, absolutely. We want it. Verbal freedom, the freedom to express yourself and your beliefs, absolutely. To protest, to publish books, absolutely, that's fine. What crosses the line is when you say, I don't want to eat a certain kind of meat, but you can't either now because I don't. And to force those into public schools, to force those into the prison systems, and to force those into other government institutions, which all affect individual members of our citizenry, is unacceptable.
Is there a two-tiered system appearing in Tennessee in the United States where, for example, with the separation of church and state, Christians cannot say prayers on public property, for example, before a varsity football game?
Right.
And yet, you have Muslims demanding that prayer rooms be set aside for their prayers. Two tiers, double standard?
Double standard and very, very purposely done. I would maintain that in the last 30 years, as we've lost the ability to pray in school and to pray before a football game, that it began the degradation of our society. We are a Christian-based nation. We are still a predominantly Christian-based nation, regardless of, I think, what some of the major media says. But we have acquiesced to the federal courts and slowly allowed our religious beliefs and freedoms to be taken out of the public eye. And now that they are all gone, the Islamic faith has come in, and literally they speak to their constituents, fellow Muslims, and say, the Constitution says you have a freedom to pray. So if they don't allow you to pray in school, you must sue them. If they don't provide washrooms special for us, you must sue them. If they don't provide special prayer times that are outside the norm for a normal schedule, you must sue them. And we found, once again, years worth of evidence of this coming from mosques to our school systems. We found official dialogue, emails, letters, representations of phone conversations from legal experts in various school systems to imams and to Muslim activists, where they have actually been negotiating ways to be able to circumvent the traditional abolition of prayer that we've faced. In addition, we're seeing attempts to have segregated swimming times at community center pools in some of our bigger cities. And these things, we fought a civil rights battle in our country to equalize people. We fought a civil war in our country to equalize people. We are there. Racism has not emerged in our country as a major factor in my mind up until about the last 4 years. Once again, I know it existed in the 60s and 70s. I know it's implied in some areas, but never in my heart have I felt that there was a racial divide emerging until I began to see the proliferation of mosques and Muslims coming in and driving that wedge in between the various communities. And to me, it's unacceptable to allow it to continue to happen.
You're defining an apartheid state of Muslims and kafir, or non-Muslims, and it's being imposed primarily by the Muslims, but also by the non-Muslims are accepting it.
Many are, yes, sir.
Do you not blame, if you want, if that's not too harsh a word, this attitude not on the Muslims, but on your fellow non-Muslims who are just bending over and just saying, yeah, sure, let's just do it your way?
Some of that comes from ignorance, just not understanding the problem. Much of it comes from a lack of understanding of history also, and to really what motives are behind people's actions. And we have to understand that there will always be competitiveness between various cultures, and that's okay. It doesn't have to lead to war. It can lead to discussions and perhaps some compromises. But when the core of a society is forced to acquiesce to a minority of the society, which is what is attempting to happen where I live, then that is unacceptable, and we will fight that. But yes, there is an apartheid system that is wished to be imposed. Many of the things that are taught in the Islamic faith have been abolished in the United States from its inception or from its very early years. Inequality of women. We had a inequality of inheritance rights in probate courts, divorce courts, child custody issues. Our legal systems work long and hard to provide fairness between men and women, blacks, whites, Asians, whatever the case may be, and to come in with an entirely new dynamic and a new set of rules and demand that these must happen, once again, we're not going to tolerate it.
26 states have brought forward to their legislatures bills similar to that you've introduced in the Tennessee legislature. Have you deliberately tried to network with other legislatures, other states, and you're here in Canada, perhaps even other countries, to try to educate people as to what's going on and what they can do about it? Is there an active network going on?
Absolutely. We the first couple of years we concentrated almost entirely on the legislative process in Tennessee. Since then we have migrated to also working that, but now it's an educational component, and we're reaching out to various levels. We understand that a political body is hesitant to act without the support of its citizenry, but we've also found the exact opposite to be true, that in many cases a citizenry will follow the direction of its political leadership, and we think it's incumbent on us to educate both factions equally, so that we can come up, so that everybody agrees this is the best thing for the most amount of people, and we move forward. And we are networking with other states, we are networking with other countries, and once again, we don't want to deny anybody from following their faith. But if you're going to come to my land and live with me, you live my way, because that's the way it is.
Representative Matheny, I appreciate this very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.